Hello, and welcome back to the final video in this Tune It Up mini-series. I'm RedSpark, and I will be taking you through how to manually create a geometric outline in Poser. This is the technology that was used by Rooster Teeth to produce in Poser their series Ruby. Obviously, when the Ruby series was made a few years ago, Poser 2014 didn't exist. So I'll take you through the steps involved in how to mimic the exact same effect that you get with the geometric outline in Poser 2014, and we will see how to improve it. So, with that in mind, let's get started. Now, a word of warning. This video is a lot more technical than the prior two, because we are going outside the box. First, let me explain what geometric outlining is in its most basic sense. It all has to do with the normals of an object's geometry. What is a normal? It's the direction that a polygon faces. Each polygon points in a particular direction. If a polygon was a flat piece of paper laying on the floor, the paper's normal would point straight up. Now, if you took that same piece of paper and tacked it to the wall, now the normal points straight out away from the wall, 90 degrees to the wall. The same thing happens with every polygon in your scene. They each have a direction that the face of the polygon points. Let's demonstrate with Chip. I'm going to switch to smooth line mode so that it's a little bit more obvious. Chip is made up of tens of thousands of polygons. If we look at Chip from the front, as we're doing here, there are many polygons that point toward the camera, and many more that slowly curve and even point away from the camera. For instance, most of the back of his head points away from the camera, while his forehead points toward it. Knowing this, the trick comes into play when we tell Poser to render the scene without the backward-facing polygons. What would this do? You guessed it, it would render the scene just fine. But it wouldn't draw the polygons that faced away from the camera, in this case, the back of Chip's head. What would happen if we flipped or inverted all his normals to point the opposite direction? That's right. Poser would now render the back of his head and remove his face. Kind of creepy, but Poser doesn't know the difference. So if we took a second Chip, colored him black, swelled his head slightly, maybe complimented him a lot, and inverted his normals, when Poser rendered the image, you would see the original Chip's face. As we mentioned before, it would render fine, but the second Chip, which is slightly larger, would cup the back of the first Chip's head, and it would look, from the camera's perspective, like there's an outline around his head. This is essentially what we're doing when we create a geometric outline. Let me take you through the steps. I already have Chip loaded. And let's switch to texture shaded so that we're back to the TOON shader. This is the same document that I had from the first tutorial. Now, the first thing we need to do is know where Chip's geometry is located. We can find this out from going to Scripts, Print Info, List Files. And here's Chip's head location. After the word runtime, unless you change the default location of where Chip is stored, it should be the same as mine. It's runtime geometries RedSpark Chip, and it's the exclamation point Chip head.obj file. Keeping that in mind, now that we know the location, we need to know how we're going to flip the normals. If you have a recent version of Poser, you are able to flip the normals when you import an object. So you could just import Chip's head again and flip the normals in the import process and you're done. However, if you do have an older version of Poser, don't fret, it's possible still to do. What we're going to do is we're going to use Daz's free modeler HexAGone. You can find the link to HexAGone in the information dot at the top of this video. Let's flip over to HexAGone. Inside of HexAGone, the first thing we want to do is import Chip's object. So I'm going to go to File and choose Import. Then we're going to go to the location that Chip's head's at, choose Chip's head, and bring it in. Now I'm just going to bring it in as is, no changes. Now it might be a little surprising to see his eyes bulging out of his head when it doesn't do that in Poser. That's because inside of Poser we have a magnet holding his eyeballs in proper place so that they look flat instead of round. I don't want outlines on his eyeballs anyway, so I'm going to delete them. Also, inside of here, there's his upper teeth, lower teeth, and tongue. I actually want those to appear as if they have no outline, even if we do see them. I want the teeth to be bright white, I want the tongue to be bright red, and that's it, because that's how it looks in a cartoon. So let's remove those. The only thing left we have is the head itself. Now, I can go a step further even in here and use the face selection to select the eyebrows and the eyelashes. Now if I use the expand selection tool to get every polygon in those, I can delete them. Now, all I'm left with is the skin. And this is all I really want the outline on right now. If, however, there was something that I just deleted that you wanted an outline on, you keep it in your scene. The problem, though, you might experience with HexAGone is importing an object like Chip that's already been completed and has materials on it and UVs and everything like that. Sometimes the UVs and materials get a little screwed up after editing like this, and I can't, when I export it, everything will go to a particular material. In this case, it doesn't really matter because I only have his skin, but if you experience that, you'll have to use, over here on this side, you'll have to reselect the different polygons that those materials should be assigned to and reassign them. Or don't edit the OBJ file at all for that. Now, the next step is to invert the normals. With the face selection tool selected and his head selected, all I have to do is go Command or Control A to highlight everything, and then go to Tools, Utilities, Orient Normals. And you see here now, every polygon has a normal. It's pointing off in the direction that the polygon is facing. In HexAGone, if I just press space, it'll flip all the normals. I just say validate and it accepts them. Now, all of Chip's normals have been inverted. They're pointing in the opposite direction. Let's export this wavefront. I'm going to save it under my TOON tutorial folder here. Replace yes. Now, an important setting here is that we want to retain the UVs where possible, and we definitely want to export the normals. We just painstakingly went through to invert them. It would be sad to now export this thing and not force the normals to be included, because then Poser would have to calculate the normals, and it would probably invariably calculate them the same as Chip is to begin with, and we've accomplished nothing. So, export the normals, say save, and we're done. Let's go back to Poser. Now, what we do is we can import that new object in. So go to File, Import, Wavefront Object. We don't want it centered. We don't want to make the polygons normals consistent. We want to leave it just as is. Say OK. And then I'm going to bring in the chip inverted object. Now, it's the same size as chip, so it doesn't look like anything's happening. But if we go over to the hierarchy, we'll find that there's a prop here called chip inverted. With that selected, let's go under the materials for it. Now, as you can see, like I said, HexAGone sometimes screws up the materials. It dumped all of Chip's head under the eyelashes. Wonderful. But that's okay. Doesn't really matter what the material is called. Just like Chip's face, we're going to shut off the diffusion, shut off the specular, and we're going to create a simple color from the math section, simple color, and connect it up to the alternate diffusion. That way shadows aren't being overriding it and all this kind of stuff. This has now become our outline color. So let's choose something from the scene, darken it up slightly, and that's now our outline color. Now we need to figure a way to make Chip's head bigger. Well, I'm going to use displacement for now. If you really want to invest time into it, you can actually use a morph to do this as well. And it's a better option, in fact, because then the outline can be seen within the preview, and you can adjust it up and down perfectly to exactly where you want it for size. Whereas with displacement, you will have to render it each time to check to see if you got the line thickness the way you want it. It's pickier and longer to be able to do, so a morph is so much easier. Now, but for displacement, I know that I want the setting to be 0.015. However, displacement happens along the direction of the normal of a particular polygon face. So, since we inverted the normals so that they point inwards, if we use a positive displacement here, it would actually push the polygons inward. It would shrink his head instead of expand it. So what I want is actually a negative displacement value so that it blows his head up. It makes his head bigger. So we do that. There we go. The material is now all set. Let's go back to the pose. But before we render it, there's a couple of things we need to do in the render settings. This, again, is a Firefly render, so we do have certain things happening inside the render engine that need to be checked because we're using displacement, and B, we want to remove the backward-facing polygons. So let's click Remove Back-Facing Polygons, and then under, and make sure, of course, Use Displacement Maps is checked. Also, set the minimum displacement bounds to 1. What this will do is make sure that there isn't any clipping of the displacement because we're using fairly large values here to move the object around. It may clip the outline on you if you're not careful. So I put a displacement value of 1. That seems to work nicely. If you notice when you are doing yours and you forget to set that, you may experience little pieces of your outline to be missing. And so this is the fastest way to double check that that's not going to happen, is to increase the minimum displacement bounds. So let's save that. And let's render and see what happens. There we go. We have an outline around Chip. It looks pretty much the same as the geometric outline that happened within Poser 2014. Now, of course, it suffers from the same issues with the mouth and the corner of the eye having actually outline edging on it. However, with this, what you can do is take it further. Inside of HexAGone, you could come in here and now remove all of these polygons that are inside the eye that's causing that wonky looking outline. And when you do that, you could then take it even a step further and actually fill in the polygons from the upper lid to the lower lid. And what that would do is when you look at Chip from a side or profile view, it would make sure that the outline doesn't show up for the eyeball. Because now you have forward-facing polygons that would be removed, and they wouldn't be counted towards the outline at all. As for the mouth, you would be able to transfer some of the morphs from Chip in the setup room. So I would select Chip Invert and go inside the setup room. Right now it's a big old blob, but I would then apply Chip's skeleton towards this object and transfer his morphs to him, and that would then allow this to become a conforming object inside of Poser. What do you do with conforming objects? Well, you then could save them to the Poser library. Yes, this was a large thing to set up and get ready and so on, but then you could save it to the Poser library and load it whenever you want. You never have to do this again. You do it once for each object that you want to have an outline on, and then you never have to be bothered again. What more could be done? You could, instead of having a solid color now for displacement, you could, based on the UV map for Chip, you could create your own particular displacement map that may vary how much the width of the line is depending on where it is at on the body. So if you were looking for a Chip having a very pointy nose, but having the outline as a smooth arc around it, almost calligraphy style, you could do that. Because now you control the displacement. You can control it with a bitmap like you've always done. So I hope this was an interesting video in how you can improve the geometric outlines with Poser. You can even do this with older versions of Poser. And in fact, this theory of using inverted normals to form a geometric outline is not new. It is something that has existed for quite a long time, and it works in other render software. I hope you've enjoyed this series. We'll see you again.